Hello, today is Tuesday, June 4th, 2019. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. If folks have thoughts about what they'd like to discuss today, please add that to the agenda. For the time being, I'll just share the agenda document. Hopefully folks can see my screen.
Yes.
One of the things, there's a couple of items that I have listed here. And we can, if you have other topics that you want to discuss, feel free to add them at the end. One of the first things I wanted to discuss was like kind of lessons learned from the face-to-face. I had tried several times before we had our face-to-face to try and solicit feedback for an agenda. So I decided to go with an unconference style. And I think the lesson I've learned there is that never again. So I'm gonna come there with armed with like a full agenda to go through. If people don't want to actively work on an agenda ahead of time, because I think I tried to solicit agenda items and there was kind of crickets, and I did that for several weeks. But I think next time I'm gonna try and do the same process for solicitation at least. But then if people do not engage, then I will definitely create a much more structured agenda. I think with the larger group of folks on the SIG, I want to make sure that we start to develop a set of best practices or decorum for making sure we keep the conversations focused and on point, because there was a lot of people there. And it was interesting to me that we try to redirect the conversation and it would continue to sprawl. So I think having a documented procedure for administrating some of this stuff for the larger groups, different sub-projects are of different size. So some projects are a smaller band of folks that work very tightly together. They probably don't need to go through this, but if they're a larger group of folks who want to coordinate across potentially conflicting objectives, then we need to have a little bit more documented process and decorum. Those are the things I learned. Are there other things that people had thought of or takeaways from the face-to-face?
Yeah, I think also what we did. Steve mentioned the conversation sprawled. So what we did was basically to do a round of introductions, and instead, so also to let everybody speak for like some seconds at least when they introduce themselves and why they're interested in the space and how they would like to contribute. And then after this, we started thinking more about the values. We actually wrote down, so the discussion of this is in down this, here on Monday, 20th May 2019, KubeCon. So there is, in this doc, more information on what we actually talked about, but we more focused on the values of cluster. So all the people wanted to, this was unconference style, everyone wanted to talk about cluster API. So we talked about cluster API, and we realized we need to take a step back and focus more on the values. What are the key principles we want to do? What are the key principles we want to operate by? And that kind of thing. And that, with that, it got better, basically.
Yeah, so I think after that meeting, there was a number of conversations that were had at KubeCon, which was also good to try and get consensus on approach and of what folks wanted to do, in particular for cluster API. And I wrote down a set of action items that I'm going to follow up on, hopefully this week, as I'm still digging out of email, with regards to sort of writing down writing down some of those values to help drive conversations forwards, but also to document taxonomy or conventions that we use to communicate. Because one thing that I found is we spent an inordinate amount of time talking past each other when we basically are in violent agreement. But words matter, so we should make sure that we're consistent, at least within that space, until everybody's on the same page.
Yep. And so, in other words, we talked about the values. We had one conclusion, at least, and I can even paste this, which is the most important thing. So it didn't show up yet on Tim's screen, at least not for me, but soon maybe in the meeting too.
So
but yeah, it was machine immutability. If you want to say some words about that, yeah. Now it's cool.
So I'm gonna work back on the documentation. Are there other things that folks had as key takeaways or lessons learned that they wanted to chime up on about? I did realize that the hallway track at KubeCon afterwards was actually really fruitful, and we got a larger amount of consensus on different things that folks wanted to get done. And I know that Andy is actively working on, I think with Vince as well, a document to try and address some of those key takeaway areas.
So I had an observation. I don't know that it's really an actionable observation, but it's occurred to me as the group has grown larger and larger that the cost of our words is more expensive. So the mathematician in me thinks about it like this. If I speak for 30 seconds and there are 50 people in the room, then that's a lot more than 30 seconds. And because so many people want to speak, sometimes it's difficult to actually have a linear conversation where you go back and forth and make progress on a particular topic, because quite some time might pass before you have the urge or idea to speak, and then the time when it's your turn to speak, which makes it, again, hard to have those linear conversations. So I think Tim mentioned this, but in my reflection on this, I think that having a more clear agenda is one way to help drive the course of the conversation. And then just for me personally, one thing that I've done a lot in the recent months is I ask myself, after 5 minutes has passed, do I really need to respond to something that somebody said 5 minutes ago? Or is it okay to let the conversation proceed now that we're talking about something completely different? So that was my lesson learned.
Yes, that's a good one. Tim also mentioned that as we have so many different things going on with Cluster API and many discussions that are happening kind of side by side, we should bias towards action, and added that as one of the values, which will soon be in a document near you, we hope. And in other words, we want to encourage also contributing code. And if you want to see something happen, also like chime in and take care of the issues. If there's something that you, now that we're formalizing these words, as Tim said, as we formalize them, if there's something you disagree on or you want to clarify, go ahead and actually send the PR to clarify or change that wording instead of just by words going back and forth with a lot of people all the time.
Are there any
Was there any discussion of the value of providing asynchronous places for people to discuss?
We've talked about that a number of times. In my opinion, I would ideally like to see GitHub be the canonical source of truth. And there's a lot of work already put into having well-formatted templates for how they would like to see issues. We could refine that particular template if we wanted to, but if we want asynchronous communication on feature requests, GitHub really should be the source of truth, because that's the only thing that has global visibility. And we can always have a larger discussion on issues, which is kind of normal in the community, to point to an issue and then have this separate email thread or discuss channel thread regarding that GitHub issue.
I like it. I don't know if it's worth noting down.
That's just the way we've done it in the rest of the community, right? So like, it's not like Cluster API is special in this regard. It's like, if you go back to the yesteryears of API machinery, you can see the full-on nerd fights of 10,000 common issues, right? So. Are there any other observations, questions, comments, complaints, concerns about lessons learned? Going once, twice. Sold. Next up, I've been asked by the release team about 115 release themes for SIG cluster lifecycle. And I see somebody put some comments in there. I think it might be Lumir, about things that they want to let the release team know. Are there, you want to talk to this one, Lumir, or anyone else want to talk about key themes?
This is basically a copy paste from before, so I'm going to leave it to someone else if they want to add more themes.
Is there anything with component config work, Lucas and Lee, that folks want to highlight?
I would have liked yes, but I'm mostly in catch-up stage still after being away, so we actually didn't get that much into the release. We have quite a few ideas and plans that we want to do, but not much of that code actually merged. So I don't think so, unfortunately.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So
I would say the same thing as well for the add-ons subproject. That we've made progress in both of those efforts, but in both there are no user-facing deliverables. Yeah,
so the things that will release asynchronously, well, eventually add-ons, that's going to be a weird one. I don't know how we're going to actually release that.
Yeah, I'm going to be joining the KubeADM call to discuss some impedance, like release lifecycle stuff with regard to that.
Yeah.
As well as some machinery.
Are there any other themes or things that folks wanted to sort of highlight in the release notes for 115? Going once, twice, 3 times. Next up, I wanted to do a PSA with regards to, because we talked about it many times, about image building. Moshe and I had discussed several times back and forth about what the MVP for image building might look like. We came to agreement, but I need to take a pass through the doc yet again in more detail. But I'd like to push up a cap for a sub-project creation and get broader feedback for this image builder sub-project. I know we had originally kicked it off within the Cluster API group, but we've all agreed that it doesn't really belong there. They're a consumer, but they're not, it's a separate thing. So if folks have questions, comments, complaints, concerns, please comment on the doc and take a look, and we'll try to get a PR up in the coming week or so to get this thing rolling.
One question I have about the image builder kept is, has there been any feedback provided by like COPS or existing tools that have similar tooling?
I mean, I certainly put the COPS approach on there. It seems like the approach is a little different. That's okay. I mean, we'll just have two approaches, right?
Yeah, the idea was that the tooling was meant to be batteries included but swappable, so that way we could have the ability to have a phased approach. So that way if people had existing tooling, they could shim it in, but have a consistent way of doing it. So if they wanted to use phase 1 versus phase 2, very similar to the way we have kubeADM structured, that gives them the option to leverage it in a piecemeal fashion. So the idea here is that we create an abstraction layer for tools, but provide the default version to be very simplified.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is I wanted to make sure that we're meeting requirements and use cases outside of just cluster API.
Yep. Yeah, that's our primary concern. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of words in this doc. It's like, I don't even know how many pages it is now, but we should make sure that it's highlighted that the goal is not to usurp other tooling. The goal is to create a phased approach by which you can call whatever tooling that you deem necessary for your workflow. Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns?
Could you maybe outline what it seems like there's one proposal left. Can you just outline what that, what did we choose in the end?
So the idea was the high level TLDR is that you have a set of phases, and Moshe, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So you basically have a set of phases where you can actually create the image, and I don't know if I actually put the diagram in here or not, but But within those individual phases, it has a default action, right? And we were going to create a wrapping tool to allow the coordination of those phases, right? So the wrapping tool will be very declarative, but allow you to have the hooks to use whatever tool you wanted on the back end. So that way it just defaultly creates an image in a very simplified way. We wanted to allow folks to be able to use phases in a piecemeal fashion. So if people wanted to basically have like an installer phase for installing the software, they could just use that almost as a separate step, right? So for people who are on-prem, that's a common user story. But I think what I need to do, and what I plan to do, is to go through the document and make sure that the images that we created earlier align with the narrative that Moshe and I kind of agreed upon as an approach.
And is the BOM an input or an output? The bill of materials an input or an output, or both, ideally?
I think both.
Both.
Cool. That makes sense. Yeah.
But what I'll try to do, Justin, is I will try to clean up the document and the words inside of there so it's kind of clear from a user story perspective, and put a shup that kept to K community. And we can, maybe next time we can have a conversation in more detail. Does that sound good?
Sure. Yeah.
And we'll do the standard, X weeks for comment timeout thing.
And to clarify, this would be a subproject of C-Class Lifecycle, or?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's the proposed idea. And
yes. Makes sense.
Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Going once, twice. 3 times. All right. Last but not least, I'll just hand it off for people to go around. There are status updates. Do folks want to, for each sub-project, do folks want to I'll just call out whoever's there. Does somebody want to give an update for the cluster API?
I can give the update. We released Kappa 0.3.0 for the AWS provider. There is a breaking change, and cluster, like with the old version, are not supported in the new version, but there is a migration path for you to take. That's a small update for Kappa. For Cappy, I linked the machine states and Bootstrap proposal document in here. This is shared with common access to the whole SIG. One note of caution, like just to avoid a common storm, which happened in the old proposal, we would prefer to have a more synchronous approach. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, please add them as a group topic to the next community meeting, which is tomorrow. This is not a requirement. It's more like of a preferred approach. We have 2 more topics. I think Andy added these. Andy, do you want to take care of these 2?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it refreshed in Zoom, but at least in the doc, I added a link to our discussion on the scope of V1 Alpha 2 and another link to the pull request that you made, Vince, for the proposed release cadence for Cluster API. So if you have feedback on either of those, please do that. And at tomorrow's meeting, I imagine we'll discuss those in more detail.
Thank you.
Any questions for the Cluster API folks? Going once, twice, 3 times. Next up, KubeADM.
So as Lucas added an item on top, we're basically getting a new logo for KubeADM by a professional designer at the Linux Foundation. Yeah, so also HA is doing nicely, and we are going to graduate it. But we have a couple of test failures that we have to resolve. Me and Fabrizio are looking at them. Somebody added that we haven't submitted a conformance PR for 1.14, and Lee is going
so Lee fixed it already, but we realized that KubeCon.
And when do we have to send the 1.15?
So we could send it as soon as the 0.0 is out, which was exactly what Ben did for Kind. But still, I mean, although KubeNM and Kind is pretty much the same thing, we have different tests for KubeNM just to have that in there as a separate product too. Now with its own logo, which is going to be nice. And yes, just so you can reproduce it with Vagrant, whatever on your local machine. But yes, please go through the rest of the issues, but or updates, Lubomir. But we need to for a short amount of time give the designer some guidelines.
Yeah, probably we can discuss it. Tomorrow is kind of booked with the CIS report, but maybe maybe we can create a Google Doc for this. I don't know. Let's talk about it offline. Okay. So HA is doing nicely. We graduated V1 beta. The V1 beta 2 config. It's all the changes are in place. I can add the link later to the Godoc. You can check it out. So we updated all the end-to-end test jobs as well, and all the docs PRs are already sent to the website. We are currently reviewing like 6 or 7 PRs, something like that. Windows has a bit of a hiccup, and basically we plan to have Windows/KubeADM support to alpha in this release, but one of the developers who signed for that is currently quite busy, and we are lacking a crucial part, which is the setup / installation part. And also something that the CoreDNS people tried to update CoreDNS to 1.5.0, but the PR required a mutation in the core file /config map that we do, and the change became so complex that we had to revert core DNS to the old version. So the cluster folder had to do the same. That's pretty much it for Kubedium.
The other question that I have that's top of mind is that, just as a PSA, because it cuts across projects, we talked about it in the Kubedium group, that in order for us to graduate to the config to GA, we want component config to be in a more healthy state, because it would drastically affect the config for Kubedium. So as we move forwards, we'll probably go through many beta release cycles until we actually get component config in a healthy state.
Yes, that's right. Basically, well, basically we would need more help, like actually coding work to component standard to make this happen. And also, well, one of the problems today is that there's a very long delay in between sending PRs and getting them reviewed and or merged, and finding consensus in the API machinery field. Because there's just a few, and that's not a problem of the reviewers or some of themselves. It is more like a structural problem of having too few final approvers for APIs, which is a thing. For example, Jordan has been trying to improve. So with Kubedium 2, I would like to see in the next cycle that we do some more training for our members to try to do some formal API review training.
Perhaps we can coordinate with Jordan and maybe have a session where we can kind of up-level folks who have been around a while. This is not for the faint of heart. I would not recommend new people to go into this blindly unless you have a lot of experience in crafting APIs in this sort of landscape, just because it's fraught with Kubernetes-isms. So if you are interested, please let us know on Slack. And I think setting up a time to actually have a training or something, I think would be fruitful.
A quick question: isn't the API training /review public already?
There is one that's there. There is a example, but I think what we should probably do is have a walkthrough of that, and then as well as take a look at component configs and use that as an example, because component configs are going to be probably a lot different than standard API reviews. And
yeah, I'll get to this later, but yeah, so that one. And then just more of a PSA that we're gonna focus more on the CIS, automating the CIS benchmarks in the next Kubedium release, which is gonna be a nice thing to have and to look into.
Lucas, for tomorrow's meeting, I basically quote unquote booked Nadir.
Yes.
For this, do you have any contacts with the CIS folks so that we can conduct a proper meeting with a CIS member present tomorrow?
I can, yes. I have some accounts in there, and I'm actually in London this week, so I can try to get hold of Liz Rice. It's probably pretty unlikely that she happens to have a time then, but I can always ask if she could join, or I talk to her otherwise at some time that fits, and delegate that.
Perhaps when we record the meeting, perhaps we can send it to her too, and say this is an open. Make sure that we preface everything in the meeting that these are open questions.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns on the Kubernetes update?
Anyone wants to say some ideas for logo, or should we? I mean, we're pretty good on time. So I don't know, just ideas of keywords we might wanna give to the designer.
A building block. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, everybody understands design. That's the biggest problem. Building block is a good one.
Yes.
A box of sorts, like maybe 3D, but not like a bash, the bash fire type of 3D block.
No. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we can take it as offline, or like I said, we should create a Google Doc for this probably.
Yeah, why don't we take this offline and do this asynchronously? Otherwise, it could potentially bike shed for a while. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Justin, Cops.
Yes, I don't have a lot of concrete things to say. We had a pretty productive KubeCon, lots of discussions with users, and we were there. I feel like we're still recovering from that, but yes, we're continuing with our like many release policy. I do think it is the right thing for us to do to catch up, and we gave a talk, which I don't know if the videos are posted yet, so if people are interested in that, like you can sort of, I think we called it coping with change, but it sort of goes into like the whys and wherefores of why we did that, which might be of interesting to some maintainers, but yeah, that's sort of where we are. Coping has a K, that will fix it.
Yeah. Any questions about Cops? Once, twice, 3 times. Next up, component config.
Right. So we have a new proposal for Kube Controller Manager configuration, and I'll just quickly, can you click up the proposal, and so just to get in and scroll down to alternative 2. This is just like yes, there we go. So just drafting myself and Stefan were thinking about at KubeCon, and we're going to formalize this into a real thing. But for context, the kubelet is doing pretty well. Kubelet has beta component config, the schema, and supports, for example, overriding flags. So flags take precedence over config. But the proxy has an alpha. Well, it has component config as alpha. We embed it in KubeADM, which is good, but also it's obviously bad, as Tim said, that we embed one thing that is alpha. Basically, that means that we take care of migration whenever that happens. So that Kube scheduler is also pretty much the same as for Kube proxy. It has component config, but lacks many of the correct heuristics that are needed. However, and why we're doing the Kube Controller Manager configuration here is Kube Controller Manager doesn't have component config at all. So it basically has no -config flag, which we want to try to fix here. But there's different problems, like we need to do separate. Some options belong to the manager context that's managing many controllers. Some options are common between controllers, and we need to be able to, for example, have the main object be v1, but then we introduce a new controller with an unstable schema. So what do we do? Those kinds of problems. But we have some kind of idea where to start, and please join the conversation there. And the workgroup meeting standard, component standard working group. And yes, I've found some new contributors to the effort. For example, Valerie Lancery will help with kubeproxy. Russ also has something that's really nice. I was talking to the Kube scheduler folks, try to ping them to in SIG scheduling and similar. But as a general call out, contact me if you're interested in helping out. A lot of help is needed.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is that, which a lot of people don't really appreciate or understand unless you've been working on this stuff for a long time, is that it enables a much more configurable system having these capabilities in place. So one of the ideas, long thought ideas of what we wanted to do is that, at least in my mind, and I mentioned this several times, so to get you hyped up about the idea, is that people often screw up deployments many times. So you don't often get your first deployment correct. You have to go through several iterations before you actually do this. But if you had dynamic component config across all your different components, you could do recomp on the fly for your different components. And that is a highly beneficial, useful thing that allows folks to iterate more fast in their environments. So if they want to enable certain features, it should be a modification to a config that allows them to basically SIG up their cluster with a config change. Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns for component config? Other than we need more people, please come.
Just want to hype it up more. Like they're the best system D units that you can think of. Like it's like system D but cloud native. Like we're doing it.
That's a good way to think about it. I never thought about that. We got to go through the SIP.
That's nice. we should add that as our motto or something.
Yeah.
It's like it's going to be system D units in YAML. We got it.
I don't know if you sold people or drove them away.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like comparing something to system D is a good way to get a lot of hardcore Unix people to turn up their noses and walk away.
Yeah.
On that note, why don't we move on to the next one?
Taking our break for comic relief. Yeah, I can comment on add-ons. Okay. There's good progress. I believe that our kind of ad hoc approach to governance has been working. Lots of asynchronous conversation occurring in the add-on management document that we started writing. People talking about various solutions and as well as generic constraints to the problems that the add-ons conversation is attempting to solve. And many of those conclusions are now becoming actionable as a result of 2.5 weeks of this kind of async discussion, as well as re-looping with the group. Those discussions obviously are recorded, standard for our SIG. If you have not been able to be part of that, feel free to take a look on the doc. Or come join us. We do this same meeting slot every 2 weeks. This is probably going to be heating up for the 1.16 release. Justin and I chatted a little bit offline, and we think that it's going to be best to move forward with this pull request that I have linked here, at least for some experimentation in the operator space. Justin and Jeff have done some great work on the kube builder declarative pattern, which allows you to build operators easily around manifests, using them as a base for iterative kind of work inside of Go. Once we have that kind of thing merged, we can start really collaborating in the repo on things like early termination of the operator for the job use case, which seems to be an attractive idea for multiple people. Talked with several parties who like the idea of a single operator code base that's also usable in an ad hoc fashion, a la, basically in the form of like doing a Helm install, right, or a kubectl apply, but with an operator, and then waiting for it to converge with timeout as the failure case, similar to what we do for things like installing the control plane in kubeadm. So it fits that model very well, and we'd like to explore that. Also, if nobody has any dissent, There's been some push to kind of keep our dependencies within the Kubernetes organization. And so things like the need to be able to template in values and as well as distribute things, we would like to build some more mature packaging primitives around customize. Obviously, this is request for comment as much as it is a light proposal. There's some interesting ideas there. And then as far as lifecycle of add-on goes, we should have a talk on the KubeADM call about what the mechanics of that are going to be like. After some discussion with a few folks, it sounds like since there's no easy way, to vendor in things like kubectl, there might be some attractive proof of concepts that might even mature into more usable things in just shelling out kubectl from KubeADM. And that interface might, eventually mature with things like server-side apply. But this is something that, at least we could get KubeADM and COPS to agree upon, right? And then that allows us to then have a packaging source for add-ons from a single place for those two projects, and then potentially benefiting other installers, whether it's your enterprise thing or KubeSpray or anybody else who we haven't had the chance to talk to. Yeah. And that's kind of the general update on what's happening in that sub-project. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I do have a question, and apparently Lubomir does too. My first question is I think from a KubeADM side, we'd happy to pilot some of the work. I don't know if we'd enable it by default right away, but we definitely turn on CI. But the question I have is broadly about the cluster directory, because that is really the default CI signal for most of the project. I don't know if you plan to, I don't know how we plan on dealing with that.
If we move with the customize thing, I could see the cluster directory maturing into something that is a central package source for core add-ons or kind of in org add-ons. But with the emphasis that the interface that we are using, be it Git or OCI images, is something that anyone can implement, right? So if you are Calico, you do not have to, you can host your add-on externally. If you're Core DNS, you can host your add-on externally if you really want to maintain it. And same thing for some driver or component that you would like installed at cluster lifecycle. Does that kind of answer your question, Tim? Or
kind of. I think the logistics are going to be hairy.
I'm sure they will be.
Yeah, it's not just logistics. It's also figuring out what we want, right? So hopefully we can agree that as a community. Do we, regardless of the clusters directory itself, do we want a single place where we do try to have a tested configuration of Core DNS, for example, and secondarily, if we do, where does it live? Which I think are not trivial questions.
They're packaging questions, which I think is really some of the hardest stuff that we're finally starting to talk about. And then, yeah, that's got release lifecycle stuff. And that's going to affect tools like KubeADM and COPS.
A very broad question. Do you think that in general the work of the add-ons group should include decoupling the cluster directory from KK?
That's a Google question. I'm going to defer to Justin. You're the only core Googler left now.
The value of the clusters directory, as I see it, which is probably separate from my role as a Googler, is just testing a broader set of E to E things. I think Google has its own, or I know Google has its own tests that at least started that way. So I don't think Google would care too much if we removed that, but I think the Kubernetes project would suffer if we just like blanket deleted it. So I hope we find a way to rationalize the cluster directory, but there are some important functions that it is still fulfilling, like providing EDE signal on clouds to the open source Kubernetes project. I think we're agreed, like separately, that like, you know, it shouldn't necessarily, we're not necessarily going to run those on every PR, and we want to get those to like those sort of PR tests to run on kubeadm or kind or something like that. But I do think there is important test coverage that we don't have otherwise, and wherever that ends up, we have to figure out where that goes. And like, there's the GKE tests, but we want open source tests on GC and on AWS and on other clouds, in my opinion.
What's kind of an interesting question for me, hearing you mention that value, is like, how do we enable a group like Calico to benefit, you know, from that testing framework, right? Like, we would have to host it.
I mean,
well,
yeah.
This is a really thorny discussion. Maybe we can table this specific one for like the next meeting, because I think we could actually have an entire conversation about how we could plan to manage the / cluster directory. And there's other updates and a lot more still to this agenda for today. So I wanted to make sure that we can get to the other stuff. But if folks...
Lubomir, did you have a specific question?
Yeah, sorry, another quick one for customize specifically. I was looking for a way to apply customization in memory, but to my knowledge, it's only possible on a file. Is this correct?
It's more or less correct. Today, there is, I believe, an effort to extract out a package, like a PKG, in Kustomize, so that the functionality would be more composably reusable. Because, for example, our declarative library that Jeff and I wrote, like, has a lot of very similar functions to Kustomize that it's silly for us each to re-implement.
Yeah.
In the cluster bundle world, we also extracted out the Kustomize patching library for our own uses, because it's not easy to use.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and then, as you know, that's how the really interesting area of discussion, I guess, like just in closing for the add-ons thing, is we would really love people to help join us and not just talk about things, but also write code. So we need people to help with proof of concepts and implementation. And that's like the customized stuff is definitely an area where work needs to be done.
I don't think Kustomize can solve all problems. I mean, what we did is we took the customized patching and combined it with Go templating to make it work at runtime. It's just sort of a limitation of the customized design.
Well, perhaps like these two topics we can discuss next time, because they broadly apply to the SIG across a number of different efforts that people are trying to do. I still want to keep on moving because we have 10 minutes, and I want to make sure we get to the KubeSpray folks, and I wanted to give Moshe a chance to do a demo if he could. Is it okay if we table for now?
Yeah, I think it's good to close this. Thanks.
Great. Next up, KubeSpray. I do not see Antoine, but I see Chad on. Is there any update that you wanted to give, Chad?
None at this time. I didn't get a chance to go to KubeCon EU, unfortunately. Hopefully we can get Antoine or Matt, who both presented there, in a future meeting.
Okay. I will stop sharing my screen. Moshe, did you want to do a quick demo?
Yes. How do I request the screen?
You should be able to hit the share button, which is in the middle.
Ah. Is that visible to everybody?
Yes.
You might want to increase the font size a little bit.
Cool. So I'll just a quick intro. This is basically part of the image builder work, and it's a subcomponent or a phase of that. So the software provisioning and installation bit that I've been kind of PRCing in the background, and it's essentially a Go tool to replace Ansible, Chef, Puppet, Bash for the use case of bootstrapping a Kubernetes host. So I'll just show you the specs quickly. So if you have a spec with the Kubernetes version and a container runtime, we can minify that. So basically we run through multiple phases. So the first phase will take these high-level declarations or intents to say, I want to run Kubernetes, I want to run a container runtime, I want to run whatever else it is, so very specific to Kubernetes, and then we take that out and emit packages, commands, and files that we can then go and action. And we do it in a multi-distro manner. So here you'll see that there's Red Hat-like, Fedora-like, and Debian-like, basically to kind of handle Yum, DNF, and app-type packaging. We embed the upstream repos for all of those, and then that basically allows you to do a couple of things. So the first thing it can do is it'll verify that what you've declared. So obviously not at a command level, but at a package level, it can tell you what you have and have not installed. And then when you run that, it will then go and execute all of that. And then you can reapply it, and it will verify that they are actually installed. Let me just do a shorter one for time's sake. So here you have a service, for example, so we can verify a service, and if we apply that, so it's a kind of a declarative way of managing config, and here we can see the service is up, and if I it will, so it's kind of a new kind of take on config management that I'm kind of looking for comments, anything really in terms of does this fill a need and how could this kind of fit in. So that's very quickly. Yeah.
So where should they go for comments?
So I don't. I'll find a place to put comments.
Okay.
I think this looks great. So you could use this both to build an image and to like verify the image and to correct an image if you started with like a stock image, right, at runtime.
Yeah. So it's designed to start from a stock image on any distro install Kubernetes. It can also emit cloud in it. So because it doesn't work on at runtime, it builds out these virtual file system and a list of commands that can emit cloud in it as well. So you can use it essentially to bootstrap in any way, image, cloud init, or random ad hoc.
I like it.
Other questions?
I have some things, but I'm gonna defer them. So if we go for the next topic in the interest of time, 4 minutes. do we want to do a new, this came up at KubeCon, do we want to do a new contributor onboarding session for the new projects, and when and how in that case? Like, for example, does the last one suffice for some projects, or do we want to cover, for example, how to contribute to the add-ons effort, or how to contribute efficiently to component standard, or similar, like in the scope of the SIG, but still like focus on other parts too?
I think the first one was a good overview, but it lacks a lot of sufficient detail of like what it means to actively work within a given subproject. I think that would be a beneficial thing to do probably in preparation for the next cycle.
Yeah,
Paris
exactly.
was
So
helping push for this, right?
Sorry?
Paris was helping push for this, I think, right? I saw her tweet about some working sessions that the different SIGs would be participating in. Is that what this is?
This is more proactive. We started doing this ahead of time before Paris was involved in setting up separate things. But I think we found that with such a large group of folks that's coming in across varied interests, that we want to be able to have a clean way of unwrapping people, or cleaner method of unwrapping people, so that way folks can be engaged, feel like they're empowered, and feel productive. Without, a lot of times we want to prevent some of the issues that can commonly happen that we see occurring across some projects.
Yes. So I think let's start the discussion there. And I mean, we don't have to cover the same things that we did last time, but more build upon. That would be the idea. Okay.
Do you want to start an email thread on this particular topic?
Yes, I can do so.
Okay.
Then we'll fill in the links to the KubeCon talks here as we go. We had a bunch of them with regards to our sub projects and SIG intro and similar, just for the people that weren't there, so they can catch up easily. And then I'm not sure why the last item on the agenda is strike through.
That was mine. I had a conversation on Slack with a few people, and the immediate concern is resolved. So we can defer this to later, since we're out of time anyway.
Okay. Any other things? Otherwise, we're done for today. We have 1 minute left.
Yeah. I think we should probably call it.
Thanks, Leah Hansen, for taking notes. Shout out.
Yeah, I just put that on the chat.
Really nice.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.